Welcome! Today we're going to go over the topic of integrating evidence into our papers. So in English Composition 1, this week we are working on persuasive papers, and in English Composition 2, we are working on the first draft of our research paper. And both of these types of essays require that we integrate evidence to support any points that we're making. So anytime a reader might ask, where did that information come from, or how do we know that's true? This is a good opportunity to support the statement that you're making with relevant and credible evidence. So in both Composition 1 and 2, our e-learning material has gone over what is credible evidence, what we should be using, and in English Composition 2, you've already created your annotated bibliography, so you should already have your collection of evidence ready as you go into your research essay. We have quite a few common mistakes that I see in the first drafts of these papers, so by going over these now, hopefully we can avoid them in your first drafts. And the first common mistake is making sweeping claims and assumptions. So you'll see here that when I list the mistake, below it you'll see a couple of examples that are poor examples in gray, followed by, at the bottom, a good example of how to take the same idea and make it a proper sentence to go into your essay. So the first mistake, making sweeping claims and assumptions, this means that you're pretty much just assuming that everybody is going to agree with what you're saying, so you're not providing any evidence. So, for example, you might write, most people agree that children benefit from playing on youth sports teams. Or maybe you'll write, everyone knows that children benefit from playing on sports teams. And while this might be something that you are trying to prove in your thesis, maybe you've already done enough research to fully understand that you definitely support both of these statements, your readers might not quite agree with you. Somebody might ask, well, did you take a poll to see if most people do agree with this? Or someone else might ask you, how do you know that everyone is aware of this? What evidence do you have to support this claim? So looking at the bottom sentence with the little plus sign there, this is how we can take the same idea and by using credible evidence, we can support the claim. So rather than the two first sentences, we might write, according to the Institute of Youth Health, and then cite it, this is in APA style 2014, children who participate in youth sports are more likely to live a healthy lifestyle. Now in this final sentence, I've given you the same idea. I've written pretty much the same idea for my readers, but I've given them a piece of evidence, a piece of my research to support it, so that no one can ask, well, how do you know that? Or where is that coming from? Or are you just making that up? Or is this just an assumption that you're now writing in your paper? So here, by including that information from the Institute of Youth Health and by providing the citation, I've made my statement more credible. The second common mistake is mentioning the research but without providing the citation. So for example, I might tell you in the gray sentence, research says that children benefit from playing on youth sports teams. This is a step better than the first mistake because at least you're referring somewhat vaguely to research that you did, but we're not giving our readers enough opportunity or enough information to determine whether or not that research is credible. So rather than being vague and just referring vaguely to research, it's better to actually cite it. So we can say the same thing in the second sentence. According to research published by the Institute of Youth Health, 2014, children who participate in youth sports are more likely to live a healthy lifestyle. So I'm giving, once again, the same basic idea to my readers, but I'm making it more credible by including my research and by citing the source that I got this information from. And finally, a third common mistake is inflammatory language or tone. So at this point, we've gone over areas of diction, we've gone over areas of how to determine our audience. Especially in English Composition 1, we've looked at audience very closely for the narrative essay. So we want to keep our audience in mind. We don't want to offend them by language that might possibly turn them away. Maybe they don't want to even bother reading the rest of our paper. So examples of this, the poor examples in gray, if someone were to write, how could you possibly think spending time in a library is healthier than playing sports? Or, everybody knows that sports are good for kids, and if you don't agree, then you're stupid. These are two very inflammatory sentences. If I see something like this in your draft, I'll point it out so that you can maybe try to get the same idea across without offending your readers. So one way to do this is to point to the research. Rather than making judgment calls about your readers, such as assuming maybe they don't know enough or maybe they're just not intelligent enough to understand your argument, go ahead and explain your argument to them. Explain to them what you did to come up with these ideas. So a good way to do this, instead of using those two gray sentences, would be, again, the bottom sentence with the plus sign. According to research published by the Institute of Youth Health 2014, children who participate in youth sports for at least 2 hours each week are more likely to live a healthy lifestyle than children who spend that time studying. Now I've pretty much said the same thing. I've given the same message. That first sentence up there, how can you possibly think spending time in a library is healthier than playing sports? Rather than asking my readers such an inflammatory question in such a disrespectful way, I've answered the question for them by providing the research to point out that, well, according to this source, this time is actually better spent playing youth sports than it is in the library or studying. So I've given the same idea, but I've presented it in a different way so that I don't offend my readers. Hopefully this has been helpful. If you do have additional questions, you're welcome to post to our forum, or you can always email me directly for assistance.